who developed this kind of definition. They said as departure point for design-based research that it is a critique. We have, and I mean, you have, I guess, discussed that with your colleague as well, that educational research is often divorced from the problem. A split that results in a credibility gap and creates a need for new research approaches that speak directly to problems of practice and that leads to the development of usable knowledge. So you see, the critique is we are carrying out research which is split from what's really needed in practice. And we do not create knowledge which is really afterwards usable. That is the main critique. I will go further. Van den Akker, he is a curriculum director of the Netherlands Institute for Curriculum Development, and he describes from a curriculum perspective many traditional research approaches such as experiments, surveys, correlation analysis, with their emphasis on prescription, hardly provide prescriptions that are useful for design and development problems in education. So he complains that what is done in classical empirical research is quite often not useful enough when it comes to curriculum development. And Thomas Reeves, somebody from the area of education technology, said there is a legacy of ill-conceived and poorly conducted research that results in no significant differences or at best in modest effect size. I would not share completely this kind of critique. If you remember yesterday, the paper we had by Philip Harper, I mean, this intervention study didn't lead to a lot of result, but it was important to know that there is still this gap between what's prescribed in the curriculum and what is going on in school. But I mean, it is definitely the complaints of many people, educators working directly with teachers who say, look, we need a kind of research which is closer to what's going on in school. I mean, that is really, which is guiding us to develop proposals for teachers. So to summarize, many researchers in various corners of our field believe that there is a need for an alternative research approach that is directly relevant for problems in educational practice. I mean, you can really summarize the complaints like that. And that is the departure point. Yes, for education design research or design-based research, I will describe in a minute a few other words as well. There are many expressions around for this kind of approach. And I draw heavily on literature coming from general pedagogy, not only from math education. And I will give at the end two references to two books, but during the time while I'm talking, I will pass around a very nice book from Jan van den Akker, Kuno Krabermeyer. Kuno Krabermeyer, you may know, he's a math educator, now retired from, I think, I'm not quite sure where from the Netherlands he is. And then Susan McKenney, she's a math educator as well. And Nienke Lehmann, she's a general pedagogist. So if you have a look, and at the end I can provide you with an email, with a web address where you can download a very extensive, huge book edited by Jack Long. So there is a lot of really good research literature around. So, what is this education design research? Barab and Squire said it's a series of approaches with the intention of producing new theories, artifacts, and practices that account for and potentially impact learning and teaching in naturalistic setting. So you see, you want to develop new theories, you want to develop explanations, the usage of the word artifacts, a little bit strange to me, and then as a word, and you want to produce new practices, and you really want to impact learning and teaching. And the emphasis on naturalistic setting means you are, of course, you can carry out intervention studies. We'll discuss about that. But of course, it should not be a very unnatural setting. So we have the following, the important features will come in a minute. I should have related with that. So there are a lot of expressions around. So design studies, design experiments, design-based research, it's usually the word I use, DBR, development research, participative action research, formative research, engineering research. There is a very strong paper by Erich Wittmann, famous German math educator, who had a talk at ICME 9 in 2000 in Tokyo, and he called for mathematics, didactics or math education as an engineering science. So it is this very close connection to doing practically something. That is the idea behind of engineering. And so you see, I mean, you can either call these kind of studies design-based design studies. And actually, we are just in the process of adding a ZDM issue. It will be issue 5 in this year, edited by Kühne Carver-Meyer, Theo Confrey, and Susanne Prediger. So we see where these are actually the countries where you have big groups working in the area of design-based research or design research. It's actually Germany. It's very strong design research in the Netherlands, actually everything around the Freudenthal Institute. And then it is actually the US, Paul Kopp and Theo Confrey are now the big groups who are working in this area. So, and researchers, famous researchers from these 3 countries are editing this issue. And you can read, as soon as the papers, the issue is out, you can read a lot of very practical activities, how to improve math education with design-based research. So these are actually 5 characteristics. And they are indeed, I would think, really quite comprehensive. First of all, you have something like an interventionist approach. That means you want to carry out an intervention really within school practice. That is very important. You want to change something. On the other hand, and that is very important too, so all the 5 are very important, is the iterative character. The cyclic approach that you carry out several cycles will be shown to you in a few minutes. So that is a very strong characteristic that you have this cyclic approach. You carry out several kinds of studies several times. Then the process-oriented approach. That means you do not want to have something like a black box model of input-output. I mean, it's of course a critique towards quantitative results that you have, that you put something data in and then you get data out or results out. I mean, that is a little bit of a critique from one paradigm to the other. So it is, but it is definitely the process is important, and you already receive results within your cyclic processes. It is agility oriented. You really want to work with the practitioners, and you want to change practice. And the sub-principle is the involvement of practitioners. That is very important, that you work with the teachers, you work with the curriculum developer, and you really want to change practice in school or in teaching overall, or even at university. And it is theory-oriented. That means you take your approach, what you really want to change, you take it out of theory, and you want to develop a theory afterwards. That is actually quite a hot debate coming up, or has been, for example, ZDM, it was obvious between 2 researchers who had originally worked at the Freudenthal Institute in Utrecht, and who discussed, yes, how important is theory orientation within design-based research. So it's not a kind of a very closed paradigm. There are many researchers around who define design-based research in different ways. So I now want to describe the focus of research function and its approaches, then characteristics, but you have already got some kind of idea what design-based research is. Research questions and other outputs, the question of the generalizability. I mean, that is of course always important. We want to carry out more than one case study. How to conduct design-based research, design research dilemmas. I think I deleted that last night because I had the impression it was too much, and then concluding remarks. So, what is the focus? Of course, you have always some kind of research question or goal. And I mean, you may either want to describe something, you may want to explain or understand something, you may want to compare, evaluate, or design and develop something. And I mean, these are all called research functions. And of course, I mean, if you want to evaluate something, you need to describe it in advance, but you may be happy simply with describe and explain without a comparison. So it's not the case that you have to carry out all these 5 functions, but I mean the description and explanation function is always the most important aspect in design-based research. I mean, actually, it's not only the last part is really an exclusive characteristic of the design-based research, because all the other characteristics go for other kinds of research too. So, yes, one research question, but sometimes more than one research function. That is something which is, I would think, characteristic for design-based research. For example, if you want to design and develop a teaching and learning strategy for acquiring the competency of mathematical modeling, let's say in grade 11 and 12, so it's kind of research I'm doing, then of course I first want to understand and carefully describe the learning barriers of the students, and then of course I want to overcome them. So that means I have one question, I have one research question, but of course I have more than one research function. And that would be a very typical kind of a research. We want to really develop teaching and learning strategies in order to foster problem solving in a special grades, or you want to foster mathematical modeling, or you want to enhance the understanding of the variable, or things like that. So, and then we would develop a teaching and learning strategy, and then afterwards going to evaluate whether it is effective or not. Carry out a survey where you definitely describe, compare, and evaluate. You can carry out case studies. So what you see, you can carry out experiments to explain and compare. You can even carry out an ethnographic study to describe and understand. You can carry out correlation research to describe and explain, and evaluation research to determine the effectiveness of the program. That means, and that is important, that in the own understanding of design-based research, you are not restricted to either qualitative or quantitative methods. So there are actually 2 research paradigms which are aiming for overcoming the antagonism of quantitative and qualitative methods. That's either on the one hand the mixed methods approach, and on the other hand this design-based research. And they both use both kinds of methods. Mixed methods is then more explicit on overcoming this antagonism. So you see there is a lot of kind of studies possible, even ethnographic study. I was surprised when I read this description, because I would never have thought that or counted an ethnographic study as a design-based research, but they themselves describe it like that. So, actually this is the from my point of view, the most important distinction. You either want to carry out an intervention and you want to improve practice and contribute the body of knowledge, or you carry out an intervention in order to develop theory. And you see already over here making a policy development. What you really have in mind, that is, you are not carrying out research for its own. You want to carry out research in order to give recommendations for curriculum developer and for politicians. It's a very strong tendency towards this kind of very practical activity. So, I mean, if I would be a researcher in this tradition, I would have formulated at the end of TEDS-M, I would have formulated very clear recommendations how to change smart education at university. I mean, we did it a little bit, but our design was more fundamental design. And we found evaluating the effectiveness of teacher education without going directly into politics. That is very different with them. They want to develop, make and develop policy development. And this distinction is very important. We will come back to that during my talk several times. We have either development studies where we really want to develop research-based solutions for complex problems in education. So, I mean, that is what you usually would think, what design-based research is doing. On the other hand, and that is something which is coming up nowadays in many research paradigms, so-called validation studies. You want to develop or you want to validate a theory. And that is something, and you want not only to develop, but you want to validate it. It means you really want to show that what you are measuring and what you are developing is really, you are really measuring or developing a theory about the topic you're really interested in. This kind of validation studies are now strongly promoted in Germany, especially within the quantitative paradigm, because it's sometimes not really sure, or it's not thought examined carefully enough that you are really evaluating what you aim to evaluate. So, I mean, what we are now doing is some kind of validation studies for text follow-up. That means, do you really measure the professional competencies of future teachers? It means you carry out your whole study in another context and see whether you see the same results. So validation studies is one of the two big kinds of studies, design-based research or education design and research is carrying out. And it means you are either doing research on interventions, or you carry out research through interventions. And you can imagine that it is really something very differently whether you carry out research on the intervention, you examine the efficiency of the intervention, or whether you carry out the intervention and that is a kind of research. That is a very important distinction. And we will come back to this distinction between development study and validation studies during the whole talk. So, if we now think about the type of development study, what would we do when we carry out the educational design research? It means we would carry out a systematic study of designing, developing, and evaluating educational interventions as solutions for problems for which know how to do guidelines exist. It means we don't know how to carry out or how to promote or enhance modeling competencies in grade 11 and 12. So we carry out some kind of studies in order to find out how to promote modeling competencies in upper secondary level. And that means you are carrying out some kind of optimal interventions. I mean, the problem is, of course, that it's optimal, but okay, and you carry out some kind of theories with design principles on how and why these interventions work. It means it's not only important that you have your intervention. On the other hand, with this design principles, you want to find out why these interventions work. It means if we now know how to promote modeling competencies in grade 10, 11 and 12, and how to overcome the cognitive barriers, for example, of the students, then we need to know, yes, why is it like that? What is the underlying? So, and if we have a kind of a validation study, then we would carry out a systematic study of designing, developing, and evaluating education interventions. For example, as said, the efficiency of a learning environment with the purpose of developing and validating theories about learning environments. And we would, for example, want to validate design principles. These design principles, which explain to you why and how something is functioning, is very important within the theory. It's not only some kind of minor methodological aspect. These design principles sound a little bit less important, but as said, they explain why and how something is functioning. So it is very important for them. So, and what you of course see is, although you carry out the validation study, you cannot carry out the validation study before you have carried out a development study. It means you need to develop something before you afterwards can validate it. I mean, that is obvious that the validation study always only can come after a development study, or you may take up already existing study or existing theory. Maybe we can open the window once more.
We have AC, we can turn the AC on if you want.
Yes, I mean, it's okay, but it seems to be a little bit hot. So, why embark on design research? I mean, I have simply proposed to you the design research, and yeah, and said it is a very important aspect, but why? I mean, it's already obvious at the beginning, I said there are many complaints that, yes, research is not practical enough. I mean, that is definitely one reason you want to solve complex problems in educational practice. And I mean, that is, of course, what you see why, on the other hand, design-based research sounds easier than it is, because you want to solve problems, and on the other hand, you want to elaborate and validate a theory. So, for example, and that is something which is very typical for the approach, the Freudenthal Institute, or the whole Dutch discussion, for example, realistic math education, as it was developed by Freudenthal, and then further developed by Jan de Lange. And now, I mean, there are others around, like Paul Drivers, Maya van den Panhuisen, who are continuing with this kind of approach. And the question is, for example, can you transfer this kind of theory into other contexts? For example, Indonesia. We have many PhD students in Indonesia. Can you simply transfer the same problems to Indonesia? Probably not. So what do you need to change? That would be this kind of very practical, but on the other hand, theory-driven approach. So, of course, I mean, you may have several problems or several levels which you may address with your research. You may wish to change problems, educational problems at the system level. It means, for example, change math education in Germany. I mean, that's something we would like to do if we could immediately. I mean, or change math education in Turkey, or change the education of teachers in Turkey. I mean, we all know that this kind of changes at the system level are very complicated, and I mean, they are usually done nowadays in the frame of huge large-scale studies like PISA or TIMSS. Then, I mean, the research on institutional level, it means what are effective methods for collaborative learning, for example? How can we promote cooperative learning? I mean, that would be something which is easier to achieve. So, if we now look, I have already said, design-based research or design research is characterized by its cyclic nature. It means we have a problem, we analyze that. Then we design and develop a prototype. And maybe already a short remark before it's in the manuscript later on. The usage of prototype is here meant in an engineering way. I mean, we have these prototypes, for example, when we build a car. And we have the prototype versions which are tested somewhere. This kind of prototype concept is meant. If you know about theory development and you know the theory of Max Weber about ideotypes and prototypes, a prototype is then something which is really existing, and an ideotype is something very exaggerate special characteristics. This kind of meaning is not meant when we talk about prototype. You will find this explanation later on in the PowerPoint, but I think it is necessary over here to know how we use prototype. It's simply the ordinary usage of prototype. So you design and develop something, and you know, okay, the first approach, you definitely will need to change, revise and change it. They evaluate it. And then, I mean, if everything is functioning, for example, we have developed a very nice teaching sequence, and afterwards all the students are able to model, to solve real-world problems on a complex basis. Then we would be happy and say, why should we revise? Wonderful. We have found out a principal way how to overcome the problems of many students with modeling problems. I mean, we all know this is not happening. I mean, we would the students were not educated enough, the teachers made many errors, and so on and so on. So usually we find out many difficulties, go around, develop another prototype, and so on, until we are satisfied or until we run out of time. That may be the case with a PhD study or a postdoc, or we run out of money. That may be the case with a project. So, I mean, there is sometimes some quite a natural ending. I mean, at the end of the day, you can't see your data anymore. I mean, that is, then you simply say, look, stop. And that is, on the other hand, the task of your supervisor to say, look, that is a stop. You can do it forever. Yes, you can, but that is some kind of natural ending. So, that means, if we do it in a more extended way, we identify a problem with the practitioners. And that is very important. That means that you meet with teachers and say what is really, or that you have a problem in mind, that the teachers report to you, that students always have problems with modeling problems, although modeling problems are prescribed in the curriculum. And then you identify the problems, the problems with the modeling approach with practitioners, and they may tell you, look, the main problem is always to identify the main variables. That is, so that means the transfer from real-world problem to mathematics. So, okay, we already know that this kind of transfer is very important. So we have identified the problem. So, and then we develop some kind of prototype solution, and the kind of a prototype solution could be, for example, what we have done in Handel, and other groups have done it as well. We have to ask the students to use some kind of modeling, of a diagram of the modeling cycle, that they always could see with a diagram of the poster hanging up, which hung up somewhere in the classroom, that they always could see at which part of the modeling cycle they were. And you could do that, of course, with a problem-solving cycle following Polya. So what kind of, where at which part of the problem-solving cycle are you? So you develop some kind of prototype solutions, for example, solution plan for modeling or for modeling of the problem-solving problems. You test the solution in context. You reflect about the design principles. For example, is that solution plan adequate for all students? Or is it, for example, the case that students who are low achievers, is it for them too difficult? Or could it be that the high achievers say, look, that is too simple for us? I mean, we would then really reflect about that and reflect about your design principle. That means why and how did something functions and why and how did something not function. And then, of course, you would go back to the revision cycle and develop another prototype. So you see that once more with a more and with a more extended circle or cycle. And you see it is the importance of the practitioner and the design principles on which I would like to emphasize. So, and here you see that is a graph taken from Susan McKenney, how this kind of cyclic process looks like. And here you see she has been brave to write up the number of participants. So you see you start with a literature review and some kind of concept validation. I would personally call that concept development, but I mean there are different terminologies around. Then, and that means to use your kind of proposals or ideas you have in mind to a small number of students, some less than 20. Then you do some kind of site visits. You see you increase the number of students. That could be, for example, 2 classes. Then you develop your first prototype. It means you would, for example, develop your first solution plan in order to overcome the difficulties with modeling. So, and you use that, for example, with about 50 students. You evaluate that, find out the difficulties, and so on. You develop a next prototype with something about 60 to 70 students. And then you really see this prototype 3. That means after you have really tested what you are doing, you then try to go up to higher number of students. And I mean, that is a little bit brave from my point of view to write up number of participants, but it shows to you that you should not only aim for small scale studies, not only because what we had yesterday, I mean, you have a very nice study, you invested a lot of time, and then you have 2 teachers and 43 students, and then you say, okay, I think the results are strongly influenced by these 2 teachers and the students. Yes, I mean, that's the case if you have 2 classes. So, I mean, that would mean at a minimum 5 classes and even 6 classes. I mean, that's really, I mean, that would either be a very big German school, or it would be 2 schools. For example, a school in a very good environment, and a school in an environment which is a little bit problematic. So then you would have some kind of evaluation, and you would try to find out, some kind of solutions for your research question. And then, I mean, you find out many difficulties with your approach, and the idea is to test it another time with about 130 students with prototype 4. I mean, that would be a big project. If you have even time for another cycle, then you have the final evaluation and the correlate. That means you really are polishing your results and the data over here. That is something which you can do if you are working in a group, like for example, the groups in the US was around Paul Kopp or Chia Confrey, or in Germany it is the group around Susan Prediger in Dortmund. They all work with this approach, and that means maybe you would enter this kind of research about the efficiency, let's say, or evaluation of problems of migrant children with the understanding of fractions. It could be your topic. Do migrant children have special problems with the concept and understanding of fractions? And you would, for example, enter after already these first parts are done, and you would enter this prototype 3 and would then accompany the study until the end. So you would not be the person who is developing all the first cycles, because that would have been done by another PhD student. Only if you have this kind of big projects, you really can carry out this kind of many cycles. As a one man or one woman study within a PhD or postdoc activities, I mean, you would be happy if you would have the chance to develop prototype 2. I mean, and 60, I mean, I would always say try to increase the numbers, but of course it really depends on the question and on the funding you have from your own university. Because that is afterwards definitely costly to evaluate all the data. So prototype 2, I mean, prototype 3 is nice, but I mean, it really depends what kind of studies you are carrying out. Yes, that's what I just said at the beginning. When I first used the word prototype, it is meant in this engineering sense. So, what kind of phases do we have? I mean, if you go back to this cycle, you see this is actually the kind of a preliminary phase. Then you have actually the main phase, which could be shortened if you are in a smaller project. And then we have the evaluation phase. So these are actually these 3 kind of phases, and they result in design principles. That means in explanations why and how something is functioning. So, and that is actually some kind of quite extended, design research model. How they, for example, are using this kind of design-based research in the Netherlands. So you see, you start over here with your problems, and you have the researcher, you have the practitioners, and you have, let's say, some collaborators, researchers, or curriculum designers, and other things. So you meet and find out and define the problem, and then you do some kind of first kinds of consultations. You try to find out where the problem really is. You do some kind of focused literature review. You analyze the practical context. You discuss with your experts and practitioners. So that is a kind of the preliminary investigation. Then you develop actually your kind of theories. So you have your first tentative design principles, which are afterwards, when you see how it's going through. You have your reflective tentative design principles, and then you contribute to theory. So, of course, here you have the tentative product approaches, you evaluate it, and then you come to the practical products. So you see that is a kind of this phases, how they are using it, and I mean, I should emphasize that this is a theoretical description. I mean, if we would ask Paul Kopp whether he can identify these kind of phases within his research, he would say, in principle, I have it in mind. Practically, I sometimes omit a phase or I extend a phase whatsoever. These phases, I mean, it happens quite often that if you are here in your phase of already developing your design theory, you go back to the original clarification of the problem because you realize that you have totally misunderstood something in the discussion with the practitioners. And then you have to go back to some kind of principle discussions anymore, another time. So you see, that is how you do it in theory. practically the phases are more interlinked. So you have, and I mean that is very important, especially for the Dutch people, you describe very clearly. Yes, you have your intervention, it means you have an input and you have the process, and then you have some kind of outcomes. And here, within this intervention and the outcomes, you have your design principles which are developed out of the intervention. Or what we develop in here or use as well are some kind of local instruction theory or design theory. I would omit the word instruction theory, the important emphasis on local theory. You are in this part, if you have an intervention and some outcomes, you would always use some kind of local theory. I would not go for a big theory and this global theory in contrast to local theory. I mean, for example, I mean Piaget's theory or Hofstede's theory. I mean, there's big theories or grand theories are contrasted to local theory. And the local theory would be how to overcome the difficulties of migrant children with language problems in the context of refugees. So, and if you try to be a bit more precise, if you now have your research based on intervention as a solution to complex problems, and then you have your design principles. So you see that is something which is really coming in both within this intervention and the outcome. And if you are looking for a kind, so that was the development theory, and if you're a development study, and if you have a validation study, then you want to validate the theory, but you see that you actually are carrying out the same kind of a study, although you want to validate your kind of theory. And of course, that is something which is coming up nowadays, and it's getting more and more important, some kind of implementation or upscaling theory. I mean, we have upscaling means you increase the importance of the study and you increase the number of participants. And this upscaling, which I personally find a quite unusual term, but it's nowadays used quite often, especially in the area of professional development. I mean, we had in the last 10, 15 years a lot of professional development on a local base with teachers. And the question is now, how can you reach more teachers? If you are only developing one school, I mean, it's nice for the school, but it doesn't mean anything for whole Germany. So if we really want to change, for example, what's going on in Hamburg schools, then we need to upscale it to many schools in Hamburg and it cannot stick to only one school. So this implementation or upscaling is something which you have especially in mind, and you have that, for example, in many schools, also in many schools when you want to really broaden your own ideas. So that was, so to summarize, we have this intervention input process, you have the outcome, and as already said, the research goals are the development or design of the intervention and the design principles or theory validation. So, and the design principles are the intervention and the intervention theory. So, and what I now want to ask you, let me see, you should now, because it was more or less a repetition, you should now become a bit more active and develop at least 2 research questions that can be researched using design-based research. 2 questions which may come into your mind. 5 minutes. You either move the camera or
Ama ben göremiyorum. Siz orada ikiniz birleştirirsiniz.
so groups of 2 or 3. Okay, I think we should now stop, and it would be nice to hear a few of your ideas. Who wants to start and say what kind of research questions came to your mind? Yes, okay, come on.
We have one research question. And to what extent does self-questioning based metacognitive intervention program improve students' work problem solving efficiency?
Okay. Yes. Well done. I mean, it would be a nice series.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, it is. Okay, let's actually use this. And are you using design-based research? And what kind of philosophy do you follow? I mean, do you refer to the approach by, let's say, the Dutch people or by the US American people?
American people.
Oh, okay.
Based research collaborative.
Because that means somebody like Chekonte or Polkov. Okay. Very productive research. I'm glad to know that. Okay, wonderful. So, other ideas? I mean, you have, yes.
What are cursors teachers' difficulties in understanding of proportional reasoning before and after lesson?
Proportional reasoning, yes. So what kind of intervention could you imagine?
Like introducing new approaches to proportional reasoning, such as the use of variable parts, diagrams, and
you will test the efficiency, or you are going to test this kind of the efficiency of these kind of approaches. It's kind of supporting materials. Yes. Okay, great. Other ideas? Yes.
I conducted small design-based research for elective courses last semester. My research question was, in what ways do inquiry learning activities make climate videos more effective? I used climate videos to enhance students' understanding about climate change, and I designed some instructional strategies to make more effective these videos. I use design-based methodology. My research question was,
how to make them more effective?
I tend to complete the process, but firstly I used constructivist approach.
Yes.
To enhance the understanding, but it doesn't work. So I changed my pedagogical strategy from constructivism to situated learning. But the results, I have no results because I couldn't complete the research.
So until now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So that means that had severe consequences. So you went from constructivist approach to situated approach. Okay. I mean, we would need to discuss that in more detail, what that really means and how you can measure effects.
I also considered cognitive load theory because some inquiry tasks lead unnecessary cognitive load for students. So I changed my materials and strategies.
And did you have a chance to carry out several cycles? That means use it two. Okay, so it means you had once your videos, you changed them and you carried out the other videos or revised videos, and you are waiting now for the results of the second revision.
I didn't change the video. I changed my instructional strategies. I used video in lessons.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I designed lesson plan,
Mm-hmm.
which includes this video.
Mm-hmm.
I changed my pedagogical strategy
Okay.
because I conduct pilot study to understand the video is effective or not.
Mm-hmm.
The video is effective, but how can teachers use this video in lessons? I test this question.
Okay.
Seven.
That means you changed the learning environment.
Yes.
Okay. And did you already start at the very beginning with the design-based research?
Yes.
Okay. So, and to which of these approaches do you refer?
Course and American.
So, for yes. Okay. I mean, that is of course the American literature is widely available. Okay. Okay. Other ideas? Yes.
To what extent digital reading is effective for learning multi-language?
Digital
Reading.
Oh, okay. What do you mean by digital reading?
Reading from iPads, tablets.
Okay. And how would you carry out that? Or is it your own research question?
No.
Okay.
My professor's research
Okay.
question.
Okay. And so, can you imagine what these different cycles then would mean for this research question? So, because I mean, this important aspect is, of course, this cyclic nature of design-based research. So, what could it be that you start with the first study and then with the second study, or? Okay. Other ideas? Yes.
What are the high school students' process about modern planning?
What are the?
High school students'
Yes.
process about modern planning.
Oh, okay. So what would be then, I mean, what kind of study do you have in mind, or are you really carrying out?
Actually, I want to improve a new framework, but actually, I really don't know how I do this.
Oh, okay, so you are at the very beginning.
Yeah,
And I mean, because this is a very practical question, design-based research may be a very good strategy. Okay, thank you very much. So are there somebody else who wants to, yes, okay. It's a little bit noisy outside, so you need to say a little bit louder.
Okay. We wrote this. What are the effects of using STEM projects in science classes on students' understanding of nature of science?
So what could be then the kind of interventions you are using?
We can design a project, a STEM project, and we could apply it to these classes.
And but I mean, the question was, of course, you are carrying out some kind of intervention. What would you do? What would be, I mean, for you it was quite obvious what kind of measures you would use in order to enhance students' understanding of proportional thinking. I mean, the STEM approach is such a huge approach, and I mean, what kind of more detailed question do you have in mind?
We didn't think about
The
it.
activities of STEM might be need us to look for the effects of science. What are the effects? So our question is, then we can change the STEM activities with visual understanding of science, nature of science.
It means you would develop different kinds of activities and then measure the understanding of the students concerning nature of science. Okay, so we are having a science background.
Me.
Oh, okay. That means, yeah, but I mean, it is very close. So, I mean, you would use, of course, a lot of math as well. Okay, I mean, you need to be, in order to use this design-based research, you need to be more precise, and I think you have to make your research question a bit smaller, because that could be something like a lifelong program.
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, in order to really research a question, you need to develop very clear questions, and you develop very clear measurements, and then you evaluate the effects of this kind of measures you have done, and then you this intervention activities, then you measure that, how the effects, and then you design it once more. And I mean, it would be nice if you have, for example, a whole year, school year, with teaching this class, then you could use these kind of activities in special, let's say, in special topics. And that means you could have these different cycles, not by increasing the number of students, but within the class, with different topics. So there could be some kind of variation.
But after each cycle, you need to assess them.
Yes. Yes, you need to assess, and it means, because these are the different prototypes you are always developing. And I mean, you could start with a kind of a very easy physical concept, and then you would try to continue to other kind of physical concepts. And then try to especially emphasize the relations between science and technology and mathematics. That means, and maybe you could, at the beginning, focus especially on mathematics, and then you would focus on technology, and then on science, and then at the end you would see how these all integrate. But you always need to have this, have a common core, which you then, as these design principles, which are then further developed. I mean, that would be important. Otherwise, otherwise you would interpret your whole experiment as one prototype. But then it's difficult to have the second cycle. Yeah, so I mean, it is a bit more complicated when you have such a big research question. It's much easier if you restrict yourself. Yes, modeling, understanding of modeling, of problem-solving problems, proportional reasoning. Then you have a very clear question, and you say, okay, I'm starting with this kind of activities, and see how I can improve the understanding of the students. Measure that. Not good enough. Next cycle. That is easier to fit within this kind of theory. But I mean, there are other theories around. Not everybody needs to stick to design-based research. So actually, I'm not the person who's saying that that you need to use that. Actually, I have 1 or 2 PhD students who use this kind of theory, but their side, we had to restrict ourselves due to time limitations to 2 cycles. So I mean, and we discussed that really in length with Clark Blom, and said, look, is it still design-based research, or how would you describe that? And he said, yes, it is still design-based research, but of course, you would always aim for more cycles. Okay. So, let's now continue to some kind of design principles or validated. So what is the output of design research? And I mean, we already discussed it a little bit, what the output could be. And I mean, it would be either design principles or the validated theory. It means that the design principles which tell you why and how something is functioning. You have as output your interventions and for example, your professional development, especially in the area of professional development. Design-based research is very important, and in the area of curriculum development. So, I mean, that is something with interventions in the development of curricula and professional development that would be a very important as output. So, and that is something which is very important. I already mentioned that for, yes, this theory or this approach of design-based research, that you include very early the practitioners. You are not saying, look, I'm carrying out a foundational research like we did in TEDS-M or TEDS follow-up. We want to include from the very beginning the teachers. And one kind of study we carried out in Hamburg was indeed the question, we are carrying out modeling activities which are self-independent. That means the students should solve the modeling problems on their own. And we had future teachers within the teacher training situation where the future teachers were there and tutored the students at school. And the question, which of course immediately comes up, what can I do? How can I intervene? Am I allowed to intervene? Or should I simply sit there, you sit over there and do some problem work? And I'm sitting here and I don't do anything. I mean, that would not be the idea you have in mind when you discuss about self-independent activities. But you should not run around and look over the shoulders of all students and say, oh, that is wrong. And then just go ahead with that. I mean, that would not be the idea. You have the self-independent activities in mind. So how could effective interventions look like? So it was a very practical a question which was asked by us, by teachers who said, look, we are advocating this kind of activities. What shall I do? Should I sit in the corner eating breakfast? Or shall I run around and help the students? Or what shall I do? I mean, it's obvious something in between. But I mean, there's something in between that is not precise enough for teaching. So that is this kind of practical questions is very characteristic for this kind of approach. That I already said professional development is very important. And of course, if you include the practitioner, you have to offer them something at the end. It's not the case that you can go into a school and ask the teachers, okay, what is the problem with modeling or with problem solving? Then the teachers tell you a lot, open their classrooms for you in order to try out something. And at the end you say, oh, thank you very much, my PhD is over, that's it. I mean, you can do that, but it would not be very polite, and it would definitely not open you the door in all the time. So it means they have to offer some kind of professional development. It is very important. You want to develop this professional context in which the practitioners are working. That is an important aspect. So, I've already said the design principles are the explanations why and how something is functioning. So what you have is, for example, some kind of substantive knowledge, which is incorporated in the intervention. You have some kind of procedural knowledge, what activities and what steps are to be taken. You have theoretical arguments, which explain the directions, and you have empirical evidence about the impact of these principles. But that is something which is definitely discussed. These are only heuristics. It means they are only steps forward what you can do. And how strong these design principles are already theory, how strong they contribute to this development of theory is something which definitely distinguishes different groups within design-based research. So, the heuristic refers to experience-based techniques for problem-solving learning or for discovery learning, for example. But of course, I mean, that is the reason why they tell you where they, Kleider Blom described that as heuristic, because it said it is of course no guarantee for success. I mean, if you would have something like a guarantee for success, I mean, then we could lean back and say, look, we don't need to do any further research. We simply carry out this kind of design-based research, and then we know that we have a success guarantee. I mean, we all know that this won't function. We quite often carry out interventions which are not working. And that is definitely something which is a very powerful argument when it comes to validation theories. Go to another context. It means if you go to one school, have several classes, then go to another school, for example, with different socioeconomic background, or one is very traditional and the other is very experimental, and see whether your ideas function in both contexts. If they function in both contexts, then you have developed something which has the potential to generalize. We will come back to that in a minute. So then if you have something like a special core, otherwise your success depends on this special school. Maybe because the school is already so open to the ideas of problem solving that it is functioning. For example, a couple of weeks ago, we wanted to carry out or to test the efficiency of a metacognitive instrument to measure the metacognition of the students. And we used that in the school. When we entered the school, everywhere at the walls were hints how to foster metacognition. I mean, of course, what we measured was that the students have a high metacognition, but that was not due to our intervention and to the preciseness of our instrument, but because the school is already doing that for a long time. So change the context is always a very powerful recommendation. It is costly because it may mean that you, for example, need to leave the school in Istanbul and go, for example, to Ankara or a very rural area, or to see whether your approach really works. So the question is, of course, are these design principles local theories, or can they be generalized from one context to the other? And this question of generalization is, from my point of view, one of the most important questions. When I remember what I talked yesterday or told you yesterday, the usual question I'm asking authors when they are carrying out a small scale studies. Does your research contain some kind of generalizable potential? Does it make descriptions or does it give results for other kind of contexts too? Or is it only a description of this class and this teacher? I mean, at the end of the day, we would not be interested to read so many descriptions of one class and one teacher. It's nice at the very beginning, but then you would say, look, yes, and does it always work, or does it at least work in several environments? I mean, that is something which, from my point of view, is especially important when it comes to qualitative study. I mean, with quantitative study, you sometimes have the problem that you are overgeneralizing something and you are missing the local aspects. So there are very important discussions around, for example, Lin, who said, look, we want to find some, we want to look for generalizable findings for a broader theory. That means here what you think about is how to develop more general ideas. And that would be really have, if you think about this cycles, you had the main cycle with 180 students, and then simply carry out, for example, a little bit of a smaller cycle with a smaller number of students, but in a very different environment. That would be the way how to generalize aspects. And I mean, they are even even going so far and say, look, you have to validate or test your design principles or local theories by a replication of your findings in several more cases. And only if you have the impression that the design principles are really accepted for a much larger number of contexts, then you would say that this is a very settled theory. And the question is really, how do you replicate this study? And I mean, that would really mean, if you want to look for generalizability, you would need to carry out the second study, I mean the study where you're going to another context with the same logic. That means you are not allowed to change anything. It means if you have developed your way how to promote modeling activities, then you go into, and although you have realized the problems are a little bit too complicated, you would not be allowed to change these problems, because then it's definitely not a replication study, or a study which leads you to generalizability. I mean, that is something difficult, because you realize that you have made errors. Said, look, I know the problems are difficult, but I mean, then you have to start from the very scratch. So I mean, that sounds very easy and very simple, but it is hard to say, okay, I replicate a study, although I already know where the bugs are. Because it might be that the bugs you have identified really were caused by the special context. So, and of course, in other kinds of research paradigms, for example, in the qualitative research or in the quantitative research as well, we call that aspect of generalizability the transferability. That means, can I transfer my results to other aspects? And actually, that kind of question of generalizability or transferability is very close together. So, design principles must be seen as heuristic statements providing guidance and directions, but they do not give certainties. I've already mentioned that. And here you see Tom Rees quoted Kronbach, who said, when we give proper weight to local conditions, any generalization is a working hypothesis, not a conclusion. And that means, of course, if you really take the local conditions seriously, then, I mean, even if we aim for generalizability, that means that is really a working hypothesis. I mean, there are even quotes by Kronbach around who said, look, if we carry out research, we are sometimes even getting more and more puzzled, because we realize how uncertainties develop. So, how to conduct design research? You have to formulate a research question, of course, and you have to formulate your iterations and the phases. You have to develop your quality criteria and other attributes. You have to develop the aspects of the research design and the iteration phase. And then you should know a little bit in which dilemmas you may come. And of course, then at the end, you need to have something like conclusions. And this quality criteria is something which I now would like to evaluate or dig a little bit deeper. Because the question is, how do you measure the efficiency of your cycle? I mean, we have the feeling from the gut. If the students do not work efficiently, apparently the intervention is not very good. But I mean, feeling from the gut is not good enough. So what does that mean? This something is not working or something is working. I mean, if it's not working, it is always quite easy to see. I mean, you see that the students are sitting there looking at you and have either no clue what they should do, or they are definitely not here listening to you whatsoever. So, I mean, if you have such a kind of a working environment, apparently your approach was not successful. But what does it mean if the students are discussing lively? Does it mean you have already enhanced with your approach their understanding? I mean, it's obvious that you need some kind of quality criteria. So, I think I have already provided you with this kind of guiding principles, pose significant questions, link research to relevant theory, use methods that permit directed investigations, provide a coherent and explicit chain of reason. I mean, that's what everything we discussed yesterday, replicate and generalize, and disclose research to encourage professional scrutiny and critique. And that was emphasized by Shaverson and Town. So, how to conduct it? I mean, design-based research does not mean that you are allowed to do everything. That is not what we have in mind when we talk about design-based research. It is a rigorous approach. It has the relevance for practice in mind. You are working together with others, and you have this kind of elaborations. And so I would like now to come to you with some more activities, what you should do before we go. So, okay. I think we had already discussed the research question. And I said the very important aspect is the quality criteria. So along what do you measure that you are important, that you are successful? I mean, if you want to enhance understanding, you need to measure understanding to a certain extent. How do we do that? So your question is develop a few examples or go into deeper in your own research question once more and say, how do you evaluate the effectiveness of your approach? I mean, that is the most important question. Okay, go ahead. I think you open the window. That means the development of the intervention. We develop the intervention and we have several criteria. That is a very approach what we are going to do.
Our subject.
Yes, so you have an intervention yes, and you want to find out what is your criteria. For example, you say, I'm going to test the overall understanding, I'm going to understand the special understanding containing affections, I'm going to evaluate motivation aspects. That could be different kinds of criteria.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, that's nice. You want to have coffee? But I always prefer to have a video instead of an application.
Yeah, it's not. It's somewhat the open like the police car, so
There is some so we have time to The task is definitely much easier if you restrict yourself to a small problem, like, for example, enhancement of the understanding of fractions. I mean, that is definitely much easier than to develop criteria how to measure the efficiency of your approach. If you come up with a whole curriculum, very difficult. A very broad approach would be very difficult too. So think about a very small idea. So, okay, I think we should stop the discussion now. And it would be nice to hear a few proposals. You're writing down?
Yeah.
So, who can propose what kind of quality criteria could be developed for a certain kind of an idea or a design-based research study?
I'm not sure what's the perception level of children on abstract geometric shapes after using geometrical applications?
Geometrical models, concrete models.
No, geometrical applications, web applications.
Oh, okay.
Cover 3D.
Okay. Yeah, so you would use, and you would leave it so general without qualifying what kind of applications you are using?
Geometrical.
Yeah, and I mean, there are a lot of applications
Cover
around. So,
3D, for example. Cover 3D.
okay. So something which is offered by GeoGebra or by Kaiser. Okay. And what would be your quality measures?
Perception level of children. We can measure their perception with some tests, pre-test and post-test,
Okay.
when we use this application.
Okay. And you said level. I mean, how can you say that this level is higher than the other?
I think there is a standard.
Standard kind of measurement, the kind you would, to what kind of theory would you then refer? I mean, if you say there is a kind of a standard measurement, then I mean, you would refer to any theory. I'm not sure what, because I'm not familiar with the theories on perception levels, but there are theories around. So, I mean, we would then refer to one of the classical theories. Okay, but no, but I mean, that would be then needed to be clarified. If you say, look, I'm using one of the tests, then you would see, yes, okay, which kind of test is it? To what kind of theory does it belong? Because I mean, it's not very clear. I mean, we hardly know anything about how this web-based applications, how do they influence the students' perception. I mean, we have a few ideas, but I mean, that's it. I don't know a lot of controlled studies. Oh yeah, it would be very interesting. So, yes.
What is the effectiveness of quantitative reasoning-based intervention on students' progress of proof comprehension or real numbers as decimal expression?
Okay, so it would be the comprehension of students with proofs.
Yes.
Okay, and what would you do as an intervention?
The intervention will be based on quantitative reasoning.
Okay,
And before the intervention, students will take a pre-test about the specific tools that will be covered in the lesson, but based on quantitative reasoning approach. And their knowledge and comprehension level will be tested by a proof comprehension test. There are 7 dimensions about proof comprehension, and the test will be designed according to these dimensions. And intervention will be on quantitative reasoning, and as a post-test, students will take again proof comprehension.
so what kind of dimensions do you refer?
Holistic dimensions. And I'm not remembering the dimension names specifically, but some dimensions focus on holistically in the truth, and some dimensions focus on the specific lines of the truth, specific understanding from the truth.
Okay. And that would focus or would refer to a special kind of a theory concerning proof comprehension. Or, am I right?
Yes.
So what theory is it?
It could not be a theory.
Okay. I mean, what we see over here when I ask this nasty questions, I mean, I would always ask this kind of nasty questions if I would have some kind of conversation with you. Clarify very clearly what kind of theory you're using. I mean, I don't want something like, okay, I'm going to use Prediger et al. Whatsoever. But I mean, you need to really clarify, I mean, concerning proofs, there are a lot of discussions around. I mean, you could either refer to Mariotti or whatsoever. So, I mean, there are a lot of classifications around, or DBG. So, I mean, it's a huge discussion on proof Bauero. I mean, it's either even, you can even say, look, it's either the Italian school or the French school, or the French-Canadian school. So, I mean, you know, or a lot about these different approaches, and then you would definitely need to clearly label your kind of theoretical approaches, to whom you are relating. And I would, at the beginning, not aim for developing an own theory. That can be the outcome. But at the beginning, you need to have to clarify your own theory. Maybe you would not label that theory, but it is important to really say, what is my theoretical background? But I mean, you already have very clear ideas how you could measure that, the development, going back to some kind of steps and criteria. Yes. One more proposal? Yes.
What are the number of self-questions that students form when they examine the word problem after problem orientation activities?
So what would be the criteria then? The number of questions?
Number of questions that students ask themselves.
Okay. And would you ask for the quality of the questions too?
I don't think on that, but yeah, it's possible.
Well, I mean, there are students around who are formulating a lot of questions.
Yes.
And there are maybe rephrasing the same question several times.
Yes.
Okay, so I think
to the problem.
Okay, great. So I mean,
Constant.
yeah, I mean, if we can, I mean, then you would need to distinguish when is a question similar to another one. Because if you think about numbers or figures, then you need to say, look, this is a similar question to the other, so I mean, it's not a different question.
Questions.
Yes. Yes, but I mean, the idea of going for a quantifier is always very nice. It makes it a little bit easier at the beginning, but only at the beginning. Okay, other ideas? Does anybody else wants to share his or her thinking with us? Okay, that is not the case. Then I was skipping many things, and I would like to simply go now, concentrate on the following aspects, namely on curriculum design research. Because there are other, you will find a few more aspects in the PowerPoint, but I mean, especially in the area of curriculum design research, we can see a lot of very general aspects. So, one more is the question, what is a prototype? And I mean, that is, I've already explained what a prototype is. I mean, in contrast to an ideotype. So you have the situation that the intervention consists of a number of elements and components which you have to identify. And you already could see that is already quite complicated. So, I mean, that sounds easier. Oh, what happened? Okay, I mean, coffee is always dangerous. I better put my cup away. But no laptop and nothing at all. Just a fun. Okay, we will see afterwards the next functions. So, I mean, that is the problem really of identifying the components of your prototype. And there you can say, you can develop some kind of principle you use when it comes to modeling. Try to make it as simple as possible. If you have already a lot of variables at the very beginning, and if you have already a lot of features of your prototype, you will come up with many difficulties. So it's because then at the end, you really have no idea. For example, when it comes to proportional reasoning, and you have, let's say, 10 measures how to, or ideas how to improve the understanding of proportional reasoning, you have afterwards no idea which was really, I mean, a promotion of the proportional reasoning, which, for example, was even a barrier, but because it was, we had some kind of promotion, they were neutralizing each other. So make it simple and try to really control the elements of your prototype. That is, from my point of view, very important. And that means when it comes to curriculum design research, that is the problem, because if you have convinced a politician that you are going to change the curriculum, I mean, then politicians want to say a whole change, must be big. I mean, unless something is big, they are not really interested in doing curriculum research and curriculum change. But then, I mean, the problem is really how can you find out and verify that your change is really effective. So that is a little bit of a difficulty when it comes to curriculum design. So that is very nice model from my point of view, the curricular spider web, where you see you have here, you have your rationale, and then it comes to, it means you want to improve math education in Turkey. I want to improve math education in Germany. So that would be my overall aim, rationale. And then, of course, I develop smaller aims and objectives. I have the content which I need to change. I have the learning activities which need to be changed. I have to think about the role of the teaching. It is quite obvious that it is very important when it comes to curricular activities. Materials and resources. I mean, we all know that teachers are teaching using textbooks, using materials. You need to think how you can group the different content aspects. The location. I mean, it's very important at which group or which school you are starting. And the timeline. Do you want to start, yes, with a whole number of schools already in the first year? Or do you give yourself more time? And how can you assess everything? And you see with this spider that is getting bigger and bigger, it means you are actually trying to increase the content you are teaching, and you, of course, you are trying to include the teacher more and more, and you are progressing in time. So, I mean, it is something you start quite small, and then you try to broaden it. That is important, especially when it comes to curriculum development. So, the three main stages of curriculum development. And Acker, somebody who has done curriculum development, I think, for his whole life. And so he's very experienced. And of course, you start with the monitoring and analysis. So what is actually going on in class? Then you are trying to develop something, and then you are implementing and scaling it up. And here you see this metaphor giving it to others and try to increase it. So what does this kind of development mean within the question of design-based research? So the prototyping approach, according to Lehman, who is one of the very famous researchers in Dutch, is, or in her idea, a preliminary version or model of all part of a system before it's fully implemented. So that is her definition of a prototype. And then you use these prototypes, you have a high degree of iteration. But if you think about the cycling cyclists, you try to use implement as many cycles as possible, and then you try to include the participation of the representatives of the target group. And that is especially very important when it comes to curriculum development. That would mean if you want to include, let's think about higher education. You want to implement an international master with a German university. It's the case we just had in our discussion in my university. What would be necessary? I mean, of course, you need to develop some kind of prototypical study, how such a study international master could look like. And you would need to try to implement it. But what you need at the very beginning is the support of your dean, of your university. You cannot already here implement aspects without the support of your target group. That means, on one hand, if you are developing an international master, let's say with universities which are very uninteresting for students, then you have a wonderful master and nobody will use it. Or if you are trying to implement a wonderful master, but your dean says, look, very interesting idea, I know it could work, but we cannot have the resources for it, then it will not work as well. So this aspect sounds very trivial. Unfortunately, it is very important. And of course, I mean, it is here described at the end, but it doesn't mean it actually, you have to include your representatives of the target group already at the very beginning. And curriculum, especially curriculum activities, are very sensitive in such a way. So, what kind of stages do we have? We have, of course, you have your first and general description of the intervention. Then we have some kind of global intervention. And here's something which is introduced, which I personally found especially very helpful. This kind of horizontal prototype, which really describes your prototype globally with all components. And then with your part of intervention in detail, it means the vertical prototype, you think how to scale it up. This vertical means you want to scale up, you want to use or want to approach as many groups as possible that they can use your prototype. And of course, the complete intervention is then complete if you have your intended target group really included. So, and that was already what we had. And this iteration, this might, maybe I recently skip that, of course, yes, but that is very important. The possible methods and evaluation activities. Because, I mean, the question is, how do I do it? I mean, that may have been the question you have asked yourself already quite often. So we have here a lot of different evaluation methods and then possible activities. Screening, that means you want to find out which scores or which groups are possible for you. That means you have a checklist of possible criteria, and then you screen different scores whether they fulfill your criteria that you can try to implement, for example, your approach with proportional reasoning. They have focus group, that is very important, especially when it comes to curriculum development. That means you invite people, experts in your field, that could be on first hand, it could be principals from schools who know which difficulties arise if you are going to change the curriculum in school. You may invite a specialist at schools concerning teaching, yes, teacher educator. So you have your focus group with whom you are carrying out a lot of interviews, and you try to find out, identify the precise research question, and of course, then afterwards the quality criteria. You would ask, what would you expect in order to call this intervention successful? So you can try to get the quality criteria out of this focus group. Walk through means you walk through your whole institution, you use a checklist, you interview, and of course you observe. That means you want to change, for example, you know that a special school has many difficulties with immigrant children. Then you would, and you need to find out what makes this school so special. Are these the children, parents, teachers? What is going on? So you would parents, and you would maybe do some kind of classroom observation and see what is going on. You would sit in the breaks and see and try to describe what is going on. A micro-evaluation would be then even, you see it's getting a bit more complicated. You would observe, you would interview, you would carry out a questionnaire. That's always a very helpful way, and you could try to get or develop on your own learning report. And then you wanted to, afterwards, to try out something, of course, what kind of methods could you use? You could observe, you could another time interview in order to ask the teachers, did the intervention you have done, for example, the students had many difficulties to concentrate. So we start every morning 10 minutes with some kind of eye gymnastics. I mean, you know that in Chinese schools at 10 o'clock, 10 minutes break, and we all do some kind of eye gymnastics. So does that help in order to cool down and concentrate? So did that help? So you would, for example, interview the teachers, you would interview the students, say, did that help you? You would, of course, in order to get a broader base, because you cannot interview all the teachers of the schools, you would try and carry out a kind of a questionnaire. You would ask, for example, for several students for a learning report. So it's really that you can see whether that helps, or maybe you realize it helps, but only for 2 hours. Okay, what about having this kind of eye gymnastic after lunch another time? It would be possible. And you would request some kind of logbooks where the teachers would describe very carefully how they experience the change of the school. So you see, it's a lot of methods which are possible, and you see that only the questionnaire is a little bit quantitatively oriented. These are mainly qualitative methods. It means you are going into school and you observe, but of course, observing doesn't mean that you are simply running around without any criteria. You have very careful developed criteria in mind what you're trying to observe. So, and that means you are in such a way trying to find out these kind of or to cope with the resistance to revision. You start with a kind of a self-evaluation. If everybody already realizes that there are obvious errors, and you can have expert reviews and one-to-one discussions if the school is already ready for change. And here, if you have a high resistance against change, then you would definitely try out some kind of field test and see how you can increase the acceptance of the teachers. I mean, that is something which is very important to bring the teacher into the boat. So, And I mean, that is something which, from my point, is very important. We have many stages and cycles within design-based research, and that might be of importance for you. Each cycle is a piece of research, that means each cycle can be published. It's important in times that you count publications. And each cycle can be a master or a PhD thesis. But it means carrying out one cycle is okay. Of course, if you have more than one cycle, that is better. But each cycle is really counts as an own piece of research. I mean, that is very important when it comes to the question, what can I do as a single researcher unless I'm already, embedded in a big group doing design-based research. So, and here you see how you try to increase if you are within a whole group, or if you have enough time for carrying out a big project, then you would try to start with, let's say, 5 users for in a school and try to discuss with them what kind of problems they have. Then you would even go to some more paper-based versions, and then of course you may have some kind of questions where you have more experts and more users. And here you see within the final version, then you would try to have more users using those kinds of paper-based and computer-based versions. And of course, then you would try to find out concerning your validity and practicability and effectiveness. And of course, you hope that really means at the end you can see that the final version of your test has really found out something. So we see once more the different kind of activities you can do, the screening and focus group, and of course you can clarify what you afterwards you use. So if you are really at the end of your cycle, then of course you would like to have as many of these activities as possible. And here once more some kind of recommendation, yes, and that, I mean, that could be very helpful for you if you have a teaching and learning strategy for math education. You may start with an appraisal by 3 experts. That means, for example, you ask 3 of your professors in your department about your idea. You try it out in 3 classrooms, then afterwards the next version is then discussed once more by 3 experts. So, and then in between you try it out with other teacher education students, for example, because that is something which a very nice trick, especially if you have difficulties to get into schools. You sometimes use your other students from your class and say, look, can you simply try out this kind of questionnaire and what kind of difficulties do you see? So, I mean, with this kind of, because it's not so easy, I have no idea how it is in Turkey, but in Germany it's not very easy to come into schools. So that means you need to convince the teachers, you need to convince the principal. If you are sampling data, you even need to convince the parents. So, okay, it's apparently the same in Turkey. So, I mean, if you have developed a questionnaire and you want to find out whether it functions, then simply go into your class, ask your other students and say, simply consider yourself as being a student, do it and tell me what kind of problems you expect. So that is, from my point of view, very important activity what they have implemented over here. So, and here you see, if you have a very fully developed program, then you would see over here, you have here the stage of development, you have here your evaluation method, your activities, and here especially you have your quality aspects. It means the more general one, like is it relevant, is it consistent, is it practical, and of course then the more detailed one, how did I really measure the relevance or the practical or the influence the efficiency of my approach. So, and that of course can be then afterwards described in a very nice description. So there are a lot of these kinds of explanations around. So we see described during the stage of development, the quality aspects. Then you have this curricular spider, where when you think what kind of, in which phase of the group you are, you describe what kind of evaluation method you have, what kind of activities, and then you have the evaluation plan. And I can tell you, in most of the cases that won't work. I mean, it's a very nice theoretical description, and it's wonderful to have it written up in such a way, but most of the time, you realize that you are suddenly somewhere over here, something doesn't work, and you have to go back. So don't be too disappointed if you have such a wonderful plan, and if you realize, sorry, I have to go back to earlier stages. So I think that would be concluding remarks. Design research, design-based research, educational design-based research can be relevant for educational practice and policy because it may result in design principles. That means explanations why and how something functions. In validated theory, especially very important when it comes to math education as a science. Interventions can be a solution to meet the needs of teachers, and of course it can involve the professionals. So it's really offering a lot of possible ideas and possible activities. Of course, these kind of research programs can go beyond single project, but as already said, they do not need to go over single projects. Perfectly okay if you carry out only one cycle, but that is important, this community of researchers and the professionals. It means you always need to try to include the practitioner, and you need to develop design principle or theory which have at least some kind of generalizability in it. So at least some kind of core of generalizability is very important. Yes, why do we call that design research and not action research? I mean, they both have a lot of, both approaches a lot in common. They have the problems we face all over in our daily practice. They aim at improving practice. Both are cyclic in nature, and both are participative. But the main difference between actual research and design research is that with design research, you aim for the development of theory. It means you want to produce generalizable design principles. And that is a very important distinction, because if you look at characteristics of design research, you can say, okay, let's call that action research. But as you can see, there is this very distinctive aspect which is very important. So I've already shown you this book by Van den Ackert, and here there is a very new book which has come out. It's part A. It is by Gerd Blom and Nienke Nietwedel. And the part A describes this kind of theoretical approach, and part B includes a lot of case studies. Something about the whole PDF file is more than 1,000 pages. I mean, it doesn't mean that you read it, but that means you look at the case studies which are of interest for you. And you can download that freely at this address. And I think that if you are interested in design-based research, if you want to broaden your view on design-based research, that definitely will help a lot. In this part B, there are a lot of very famous researchers in this area who have developed case studies. So thank you very much for your attention. So I think we should have, in order to be realistic, we will start at 1:15. but German time.
Anladınız değil mi German time?
German time would be a 11:15.
O da güzel. Arkadaşlar bir çeyrekte tekrar başlayacağız. Adres değişirse ben gönderirim. Bazen adres değişebiliyor, bakacağız. Katıldığınız için teşekkür ederiz. Buradaki soruları da öğleden sonra sormaya çalışırım, burada sorduğunuz soruları. Onları cevaplayamıyoruz böyle yazılı olarak.